Buried. Buried. I'm going to have to make sure we're working here. All right. Raise your hand if you have, Jason's already got his hand up. He's skipping ahead. He just skipped the question to the answer. Does anybody in here have trip phobia? Anybody in here? Okay. All right. Roger's raising his hand. All right. Is anybody in here afraid of being buried alive? Here we go, Barrett. All right. Okay. Somebody says, who isn't, right? That's a powerful phenomenon, isn't it? Just to imagine that, and maybe you don't want to imagine that, so I'm not going to really try to lead you down that path too much this morning. I don't want anybody passing out or anything like that. But being buried, there's something about that just disturbs us in a way that very few things can. It's a fear that just about every human being has. Whether you're claustrophobic or not, whether you have any of those other phobias, who wants to be buried alive? And there's some historical examples of people going to some different lengths to avoid that. During the 18th and 19th centuries, it was a time, of course, when the medical profession was not always able to declare death in the way that we are today. And it was fairly common for somebody to be buried alive. They'd have some kind of condition where they had a very weak pulse and all of that. And so there were some cemeteries that began to install what they called grave bells. Grave bells. And they formulated some type of chamber and maybe a lead pipe that went down into the coffin, and there was a string then attached, left the end in the coffin, and a bell hanging outside the burial. And so if you were one of the unfortunate souls to experience that, you would reach around in the dark and find that rope, that thread, and give it maybe several good tugs. And there were watchers that would be stationed 24/7 after a few days after a recent burial, and that was their job, to listen and watch for the grave bells. Hey, we've got a problem. Now, we had that happen about 4:30 this morning at our house. All right, it was a grave bell, awakening the dead. Now, not literally, but our doorbell, and it's done this at least once before, so it wasn't. We were kind of prepared, but it malfunctions, and so you get this odd, high-pitched, but low-volume bell or tone in the middle of the night or early morning, however you want to think about that. So sometimes grave bells, they can be useful, I suppose. Let's think today about a man who refused to stay buried. And no, I may not be going where you think I'm going. A man who would not, and we're still in Western Oklahoma, so I didn't want to put that on the PowerPoint or the handout, but we'll just say this morning he wouldn't stay buried. A man who had a lot of different experiences, a lot of different life problems that were thrown his way, almost like dirt being thrown on a coffin, but he kept on and would not be buried. The man's name is Joseph. Joseph. And for today, we could think about it this way. If we had to have our takeaway statement, it might just be the simple statement that we can endure, there's your word, endure through, and I'm going to add only through, our great God. Because the story of Joseph isn't really about Joseph. It's about a God who carries his own through the various problems and struggles that try to bury them. And so because of that, Joseph is a man who would not stay buried. I see some of you are likely already making your way to Genesis. We are going to be reading some from Genesis. For much of this today, since we're flying through Joseph's life and seeing different examples of how Joseph wouldn't stay buried, I'm going to have the references on the screen. They're on the handout, and that is what you're going to have for much of this, is the reference to look at perhaps at another time. A man who wouldn't stay buried. Let's look at the first couple of examples together. Genesis chapter 37. First of all, Joseph wouldn't stay buried by special treatment or jealousy. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 37. We'll read to kick things off and then consider the overall references. Genesis 37, beginning at verse 2 this morning. Let's read 2 through 4 of Joseph and special treatment. Have you ever had anyone treat you with special treatment? Genesis 37, beginning at verse 2. It says, "These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father." Some might refer to Joseph as a tattletale. We'll just keep reading. It says in verse 3 that now Israel, a.k.a. Jacob, their dad, loved Joseph more than any other of his sons. And he did have quite the handful of sons, but Joseph is special. Have you seen parents play favorites? There's some sayings and some ideas out there. Sometimes it's said that you need to make sure you spend the same amount of money, or if you do one thing for one kid, you have to make sure you do something for the other kid that equals that. And I'm not so sure about setting absolute ideas like that, but Jacob, maybe he could have learned something from that. But he loves Joseph the most. And it says that he gave him and made him a robe of many colors. There's that coat of many colors. Or it could have been something else about this robe, but it's a special robe. It's either of colors or it's length or something, but it is not only a special gift just for Joseph as an expression of this special love, but it kind of makes Joseph stand out as the favored son, the VIP of the home life of Jacob and the sons. How does that work? Special treatment. You don't have to be a politician or a celebrity for someone to, in a way, lay out the red carpet for you. It might be a parental figure. It might be a spouse. It might be someone in your life that treats you like you're somebody. How do you feel about that? How do you handle it? Isn't it easy to feel pretty good about it? Isn't it easy to allow that to stroke the ego? And if you didn't have a pride problem, you might have one now as you react to that. You start thinking, hey, maybe I am somebody special. And you start looking and longing for more special treatment. But as I look at Joseph here and his whole life, it starts here. I don't think it buries Joseph. Now, some might say what's about to happen, maybe he should have kept some of it to himself. Maybe he was affected somewhat by the special treatment. Because then you have that other half, right? In verses 5 through 11, you already have it in verse 4, that because of this, the other brothers, can you imagine that? Can you imagine what happens when your brother or your sister gets the special treatment? They're the special child. Maybe they're the baby, kind of like Joseph. Maybe they're the child that is the athlete, or the one that's getting all the achievements and therefore all the praise. And so they got a little jealous of Joseph. In fact, the Bible says they hated Joseph. Again, whether you want to lay the blame accurately at Jacob or Joseph or whoever, they took it out on Joseph. And Joseph tells them some dreams. And we can read into the text as if Joseph is boasting about it. I don't know. He may just be sharing what he experienced. And the dreams are accurate predictions of what is going to happen, so they're from God apparently. But that just adds fuel to the fire. When Joseph tells them, I've had these dreams where you, Dad, and my brothers, you're all going to be bowing down to me. Even his dad at one point, I think it's in verse 10, he says, okay, I don't know about this. But in verse 11, it just intensifies the jealousy. Have you had that? And it might not be anything that you have done yourself, but for whatever reason, somebody is jealous of you. That's what happens first in Joseph's life. And what I find as I read Joseph is overall, Joseph is someone who instead, and you might look at his brothers for that, but instead of being reactive, where he reacts to everything that happens to him, Joseph, he's more responsible than that. He responds to what happens to him in his life. Because it's about to go downhill. He's getting special treatment. His brothers are jealous. Now they get their opportunity. Let's keep reading or keep looking further into Genesis 37. And secondly, this morning, Joseph, he receives betrayal and then slavery. If you pick up about verse 18 of this chapter, Joseph goes to check on his brothers. They see him coming, and it's, here comes the dreamer. So they begin to plot, and we'll see what happens to his dreams now. At one point, it's for certain they're going to kill Joseph. Then Reuben steps in, and okay, let's not kill him. And in the end, they throw him in a dry pit. And then they sell Joseph into slavery. Now, I did some pretty mean things to my brother when we were growing up. I don't know that I ever threw him in a pit or threatened. I might have threatened, but I don't know that I ever really seriously thought about killing him. Now, he might have thought about killing me. He can answer that. He's in the back for a reason, right? Got him caged up back there. But that's just how far they take this jealousy and this hatred. They follow through with these actions and betray their own brother in this pretty extreme fashion. You could look through history and think of various individuals, from Et tu, Brute with Julius, or the famous translator of the Bible, William Tyndale, or you could think of, with a kiss, Judas. Betrayal. Is there anything that hurts us more than when someone that here in our own family turns on us? Betrayal. There's a lot of people that just right here, when he's sitting in a pit, the tide would turn for Joseph. In a way, he's literally buried. But he doesn't stay buried. He ends up enslaved to a man named Potiphar. If you read the first 6 verses, or 5.5 of Genesis 39, you got to skip a chapter. But he doesn't stay buried. God is with Joseph, and Joseph rises through the ranks. He's still got a pretty rough situation. He's still a slave, but he makes the best of it. So maybe you've been there. Might not be actual slavery, I doubt that, but it might be something, whether it's that job or it might be a certain situation or relationship where you feel like you've got that ball and chain, you're enslaved, you can't get out. But Joseph doesn't let that bury him. He's still responsive in the way that he lives life now as a slave. And he's still a teenager. Most of his youth is spent as either a slave or in prison, from 17 to 30. Those precious 20s are wasted away. But he doesn't stay buried. From prison or from slavery and betrayal, he keeps on. Now, I don't want us to get the idea that Joseph is this superhero character. I think it would be unrealistic for us to read through Genesis and picture Joseph as he's in that pit. His brothers threw him in. He's sold to the traders, and then he's sold to Potiphar in Egypt. And he is just always the happy-go-lucky guy. He never has a moment of despair or discouragement. No, I think there had to be moments where Joseph is wondering, why? Why me? But he doesn't stay. He doesn't stay buried by any of it. But we're not done with Joseph yet, right? He's still a slave to Potiphar. I have through verse 6a. That should be on the screen. Well, next we find Joseph caught in a web of seduction and deception. And I left that word for you to fill in, seduction. I figured you'd enjoy that as a sermon note, fill in, seduction. That's what happens to Joseph. In Genesis 39, beginning at the second half of verse 6 through verse 10, Joseph has everything at his disposal. Potiphar, he just eats. He doesn't have to manage or do anything. He trusts Joseph with everything. But of course, Joseph doesn't have Mrs. Potiphar. But she takes a liking to Joseph. He's young. He's pretty good looking, apparently. The text says he's handsome. And so she invites Joseph. And he refuses. She's persistent. This isn't one time, and Joseph says, no, we're not going to do that. He looks at his master from a certain level, and then he says, how can I sin against God? He brings in a couple of different reasonings here, and she keeps on. Now you imagine you're Joseph. You're young. You're a slave. Yeah, things are a little better than they could be as a slave, but you're still a slave. Your brothers have done this to you. Why not really make the best of it? And she keeps on, day after day, every day. She's consistent. Come on. Who's going to know, right? And then one day, in verses 11 through 18, when she tries to seduce Joseph, he just leaves. He runs. Pretty practical advice for escaping sexual temptation or any temptation for that matter. He gets out of the house. But in the process, she's left holding his coat. And so then she makes these false accusations about Joseph. So in the one place, Joseph is in the workplace setting, in a sense, of sexual tension and temptation, and now it's the false accusations. Has anyone ever lied about you? Made up all sorts of things? That's Joseph. And note this, mark it down. When I am faithful to God, when I hold on to my integrity, when I don't throw away my values, even to chase the dream I think might be something good, it doesn't always work out well. We tell ourselves sometimes, and sometimes we're taught this, that if you just do what's right, you make the next right decision, you be a person of integrity, then everything's going to work out for you. The outcome will be great. You'll have success, and everything will just go so swell for you. That's not always true. Joseph does what is right and keeps on doing what's right, and it doesn't work out well for Joseph. Now, at some point, it's going to work out for everyone that keeps doing what's right, but not immediately, and it may not be for a long time. Joseph has a few more years now to spend in prison, all because he did what was right. You and I might find ourselves faced with that decision, that right or wrong decision. And it may be that if I choose to please God, it may be that my life gets a little more difficult. It did for Joseph. So we see Joseph goes from special treatment and jealousy to betrayal and slavery. Now he's caught in seduction and deception. And we're still not done. Here you have to go over a few chapters in a moment, but let's not leave chapter 39 yet. Let's read together the last paragraph of Genesis 39. I need to hit a couple of buttons here. All right. Genesis 39 is where we find Joseph enslaved and then imprisoned. Genesis 39. His master hears of it, has him thrown in Pharaoh's prison or dungeon. But it says in verse 21 of Genesis 39, the Lord was with Joseph. It's very similar to what you'll find a chapter earlier at the beginning of chapter 39, at the beginning of this chapter. And showed him steadfast love, verse 21 continues, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And so the keeper puts Joseph, in verse 22, in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge. That same story keeps being retold in different ways for Joseph because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. But am I the only one that reads that? And as much as I'm comforted by and there's an appreciation for God being with Joseph, he's still in prison, isn't he? So there may be occasions in my life where I might look at my circumstances and think God is either upset with me or God just doesn't care about me. Joseph could have felt that way. Did he feel that way at times? Perhaps so. But the reality behind the scenes and the reason he is successful in his dire straits as he is because God isn't mad at Joseph. And he isn't looking the other way. He's still with Joseph even in and through his imprisonment. Prison. When we might say Joseph is at his lowest. He's hit rock bottom. And that's a time when that can be dangerous for us. Whether it's a financial thing where we're going through bankruptcy or at least some difficult times, and it looks like some difficult financial situations are on our horizon. For the church, there may be persecution on the horizon. But even as in our own personal lives, when we reach that point, we can go one of two directions. We can either turn to God, or we can turn away. And we can give up, throw in the towel. I'm done. My life is done. I'm done. Our lowest. But what can be as, if not even more dangerous to our spiritual health is when we're at our highest. Now skip a chapter. And in chapter 41, finally somebody remembers Joseph, an ex-prisoner. Joseph is set free. He comes to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. He predicts the famine. And for Pharaoh, it's in Genesis 41, 37 through 57, who better than the guy right here, than Joseph, to take charge? And so that story gets told again, but now it actually is really good because he's not just in charge in prison, he's in charge of the superpower of Egypt, second to Pharaoh. And he has privilege. He has Pharaoh's daughter for a wife, You look at every facet of his life, everything is just splendid for Joseph. Power, position, privilege, those are the things that can bury us faster than anything. What's the saying the British Lord coined? Power corrupts. Absolute power absolutely corrupts. Here we also have example after example. Politicians, various leaders who've let the power go to their head. They get power hungry, and they either want to do everything they can to get more power or hold on to the power they already have, or use that power on somebody else's life. We don't call them control freaks for nothing. So is Joseph at his best position here, or in some ways his worst? But he doesn't let it bury him. Think back to where we began. The jealousy, the betrayal. We like to think that time heals all wounds, but Joseph's brothers get it. That when you've spent 22 years, and at least a good half of that as a slave and a prisoner because of what your own brothers did to you, for no real reason other than their own jealousy and hatred, you've had a lot of time to stew and become bitter. And when his brothers show up, helpless and empty-handed, to the brother they don't recognize who is in charge now, and they bow before Joseph, he has every opportunity and means to exact his revenge. Here we go. Now he has some fun with them, but he forgives. Even later, when Jacob dies, in Genesis chapter 50, the brothers are thinking that must have been the one thing holding Joseph back from getting even. And Joseph's dead now. Daddy's dead. What's going to stop Joseph from doing the same or worse than what we did to him all those years ago? But Joseph isn't buried, or at least doesn't stay buried, by power or by prison. Let's turn now to Genesis chapter 50. And let's read together the last few verses of Genesis 50. Death itself comes calling for Joseph. Genesis 50, verses 24 through 26, the very end of the book. We read this from Joseph. Genesis 50, verse 24. He says, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to our dad, Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons, watch this, of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died. Now, that last statement of Genesis, being 110 years old, they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. The Hebrew writer says Joseph did that by faith. Faith here in the promise of a God that Joseph had learned the hard way is a God who will be there. And it may take a lifetime. It may take 400 plus years, and it's going to. But one of these days, Joseph says, we're going to leave here. And that happens. It's recorded in Joshua 24, verse 32. They carry the bones of Joseph, the man who wouldn't stay buried, even when it actually did happen for real. He says, no, you carry me to the land of promise. As we look at the life of Joseph, we see a man a man who's not perfect, but a man who might leave us rather excuseless. When we start looking at all that he endured, and we start trying to justify our own sin, we start whining and complaining about our situation. But as we've seen, the key to a life like Joseph's is to trust in a God like Joseph's. A God who, even when it may not feel like things are going to ever work out well, who will help us to carry through for His glory. Think about the bigger picture, even bigger than just Joseph's life at work here. And, yes, He'll carry us through for our good. That's the story of Joseph. Now, we could think about another man who not only wouldn't stay dead, but who couldn't stay dead. Joseph is a type of this man. This man is Jesus. It may be for you today that you're someone who is lost in life and lost because of sin. Jesus is the risen Savior to carry you out of sin through this life. And as a Christian today, you're facing various things. And you're here today with your heart and problems and brokenness. And there stands a God to be there. We can endure only through our God. Let's stand and sing together.